Wheat was domesticated 10,000 years ago. This is the type of wheat that was handed generation to generation and through ancient trade routes and populated the world for those 9,900 years. The improvement of wheat varieties is only a very recent phenomenon.
We've been growing wheat for around 10,000 years. Most of us eat it in some form every day, in things like bread, cereals, or pasta. In fact, 1 in 5 of the calories you consume comes from wheat. But what we harvest today is very different from the wheat we grew centuries ago. In fact, it's almost impossible to grow ancient wheat anymore, except for a very few places, like here in Norwich, in the east of England. I'm used to combine harvesters that are a bit bigger than that and move a bit faster. What's going on here?
This is an outdoor laboratory, and think of the plots like samples, and we need to treat each plot individually. So these are specialised small combine harvesters which only take that unique plot. We also have all the other equipments like miniaturised farm equipment, the drills that sow the seeds, the application of agrochemicals, etc. It's all brought down to the sample level rather than large-scale fields that you're talking about.
Large-scale fields are the result of industrial agriculture. And although that's helped feed humanity, it's effectively wiped out a lot of native wheat varieties, or what the experts call land races.
So our land race is the type of wheat we used to grow where it was exchanged between farms along trade routes, but not systematically selected to be better and better as we do in modern breeding programs.
So the clue's in the name, the race of wheat that we grew on our land.
Exactly.
And some of these land races are really ancient.
Well, they are ancient, so wheat was domesticated 10,000 years ago. This is the type of wheat that was handed generation to generation and through ancient trade routes and populated the world for those 9,900 years. It's only the improvement of wheat varieties is only a very recent phenomenon.
And another thing that's different about that harvester is each individual little plot is taken and put in a different bag.
Absolutely, and those bags have their own unique identity. You'll see QR codes on those bags, that's linked to a database. The combine harvester itself is collecting data for yield, moisture, protein content, specific weight right now, and that's being fed to a database.
So I look over there, I see some are tall, some are short, some have got other characteristics. So each one of those is a different variety or land race.
Land race, that you're looking at genetic diversity, and what you're seeing is just some facets of that diversity, which is nice to see, all the visible stuff. But there's also amazing things which you can't really see yet, like the yield, the disease resistance, the stress resistance, a huge amount of diversity behind us.
Here's the thing, most of that genetic diversity has been lost. Wheat varieties that produce higher yields now dominate the world. Some of that ancient wheat still survives today though. It's what you see being harvested here. And it's all due to one man, Arthur E Watkins. Each individual one of those little plots is representative of the Watkins collection.
That's right, they're all accessions from the Watkins collection, and where we continue to assess them.
We don't have many pictures of Watkins. You can just see him at the top right of this photo. He was known to be a shy man who became a botanist by accident. Watkins was drafted to fight in the First World War when he was just 19 years old. After the armistice, he was ordered to stay in France and work as an agricultural officer to help feed soldiers still stationed there. When he returned to the UK, he saw that new wheat varieties that could feed more people were going to dominate the market. And so, in an amazing act of foresight, he realised that could cause problems in the future.
He was saying that there's this new phenomenon of plant breeding. The type of wheat that we've been growing for a long, long time all over the world is going to be displaced by these improved varieties. And sure, they are improved, but there's many, many things, useful traits that we'll leave behind if we're not careful.
So Watkins asked people around the world to send in samples of local wheat. His original collection amassed thousands of land races, but only 827 remain today. The seeds are regularly sowed and harvested to replenish stocks. They're kept here at the John Innes Centre. So this is the Holy of Holies.
For us it is.
Yeah. Oh, it's not quite what I thought. It looks a bit like the screw section in my local hardware.
That's not a bad analogy because it's a little bit like that. It's a warehouse where we need to provide germplasm to researchers all over the world.
So what have we got here?
So you can see here that Watkins would write out to various embassies and consulates around the world, or
Yes.
British Army garrisons, and he'd say, go to the local market, buy some seed. People did that. They sent it back to Cambridge for him to analyse, and then he grew it here and analysed these are called the spikes. They're the heads or ears or spikes of wheat. And this seed here must be decades old. We're not sure exactly when this was done, but at least 50 or 60 years old, and it won't be viable.
Oh,
So if you took the seed from here and planted it, it wouldn't grow.
Which explains why it's freezing in here. Because I saw some mildew on the old samples.
Yeah.
These you've got to keep fresh.
Exactly right. To keep seed viable, which means so it can continue to germinate, you keep it cold and you also keep it dry.
You're crossbreeding all these different land races. I'm struggling to understand why you do that.
Yeah, that's to find the genes. So genetics requires crosses. You make crosses and you look at the progeny.
Yeah.
Just think of children, and then you see these traits segregating. Some of the progeny have it, some don't.
Like I've got blue eyes and my brother's got brown eyes.
Precisely. And then you link that to genomics, where you actually have the DNA sequence, and you can say your brother's brown eyes are always associated with a certain piece of DNA. And you can do that in large populations, and eventually you can say unequivocally, yes, brown eyes are controlled. Eye colour is controlled by these genes, and then these particular DNA changes within them make either a brown eye or a blue eye. That's just what we're doing here.
So you can see that let's say the brown eye is only available in certain strains.
For us in wheat, it's yield, disease resistance, abiotic stress resistance, all sorts of new traits, nutritional quality. And these are the things that we need
Salt
in modern
resistance?
agriculture. Absolutely. Any trait that you can think of, we would screen for.
And there's even one I believe you found that's resistant to slugs.
Yeah, that's been a really enjoyable project. So together with a consortium of British farmers who were interested in not using molluscicides, the type of chemicals that you use to control slugs, we screened the Watkins collection, and sure enough, we found an accession from Turkestan, which seemed to confer slug resistance, and we've confirmed that in the field now.
So Watkins wrote to some British Empire officer in Turkestan and said, bring me some wheat that you can find in the market, and I'm going to store it. And years later, you've been able to say, oh, guess what? It gets rid of slugs.
Exactly, and that's exactly the feeling we get when we screen it. It's wonderful that 100 years later, this wheat doesn't exist in farming anymore, and you find these traits within it.
And we've got another one in here.
Yeah, these are some Chinese land races. A very large part of the collection comes from China. And it was a really nice aspect of the project that we've just been involved in, that we're able to repatriate these Chinese land races back to China.
Land races that had been lost in China.
Absolutely.
Because of breeding.
Because of exactly what we've talked about, that they were displaced by modern varieties, the Green Revolution.
Because that's the problem, isn't it? When you breed for one trait, like bigger seeds or longer ears or something like that, you can lose other traits that you didn't know were there.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum within crop improvement, that by improving things, you make the base more narrow. And our job is to keep the breadth feeding into modern varieties of wheat.
Dr. Griffiths and his team want to use the genes from ancient land races to improve modern wheat. But the wheat genome is huge. It's made up of 17 billion units of DNA. Compare that to around 3 billion in humans. So the team here collaborated with scientists in China who managed to sequence the DNA of all 827 land races.
Okay. Yes, sir.
They found that modern varieties only make use of 40% of the genetic diversity found in the Watkins collection. Professor Shifeng Chong led that research at the Agricultural Genomics Institute in Shenzhen, China. What are the challenges of sequencing the DNA of wheat?
Every organism has a genome, and I think in the past decade, the new technology, like sequence technology, can help us to decode each of the letter. The technology is easy, but the task is not easy because the genome is huge. The wheat genome, people call it's the average among crops.
Genetic science is more than a century old, but it wasn't until 2018 that the first fully annotated reference genome of bred wheat was published. That's when Professor Chong started working with the John Innes Centre.
Because the wheat genome is so huge, so challenging, and the John Innes Centre realized the importance of the genome, but they need help. So they came to Shenzhen because we are working in agricultural genomics. This is our expertise. So they came to ask help. And we share the idea that the genomics can help. The genomic revolution can lead to a genetics revolution and also a breeding revolution. So we decided to collaborate together and follow open, complementary, and interactive collaboration. The philosophy and spirit is just follow the Human Genome Project, owned by all, shared by all, and done by all.
Professor Chong's team eventually sent back a suitcase of hard drives amounting to 1 petabyte of data. That's 1 million gigabytes. It was packed with information about the genetic variation that simply doesn't exist anymore in modern wheat. How can we put to use the genetic diversity you've found in the Watkins collection?
Since 1920s, the nitrogen revolution, that is use of chemical industrial fertilizer that boost the yield a lot, and also the population increased a lot because of the yield. But the utilization of the chemical fertilizer caused a lot of problems, the environmental problems. So our water, the river, the lake, the air, a lot of pollution, because the production of the chemical fertilizer need a lot of energy from the oil, from the gas. So that's an energy intensive approach and it cause a lot of environmental and also economic cost. So our development, the human society, the development, and also the increase of the food, of the yield, in the cost of the environment. So that cannot be sustainable.
Chemical fertilizers are credited with saving millions of people from starvation, but they've also been a huge source of pollution. Most of those chemicals, like nitrogen, which boosts crop growth, end up in waterways, leading to an explosion in plant life, which then depletes the water of oxygen, killing fish and other species. Nitrogen fertilizers also contribute to climate change by releasing a greenhouse gas called nitrous oxide. And excessive use can lead to acidification, which ends up reducing the fertility of soil.
So we needed to make the modern wheats, that the wheat do not need the chemical fertilizer. They can have a higher nitrogen yield efficiency. So the fertilizer will not pollute the water, the air. Or even in the future, we can make the wheat self-fertilizer. We can borrow the legume root nodule symbiosis. That is sustainable.
Root nodule symbiosis is a special feature of plants from a family known as legumes, such as peas, beans, and peanuts. It refers to a mutually beneficial relationship between legumes and a bacteria called rhizobia. The bacteria live in the legume's root nodules and convert nitrogen from the atmosphere into ammonia, a key nutrient for plants, reducing the need for nitrogen fertilizers. Genetic researchers are now trying to introduce that feature into wheat.
So how we can make it? We need to borrow the traits, the diversity from the ancient wheat, because ancient wheat has maintained the superior trait. Or we can borrow the superior trait from legume, from nature, from evolution. So that is the reason in the future we can develop the superior wheat that is sustainable in agriculture.
As part of a quest for agricultural sustainability, scientists at the John Innes Centre are looking for genes that can fight disease. So are all of these from the Watkins collection, or are they?
This is all modern wheats, hence
Right.
them being very short. They've all got something called
You can tell because they're short.
semi-dwarfing gene. Yes, yeah, they're short, unlike the Watkins, which is enormously tall.
So we're in Watkins country now.
This is it, yes.
Professor Paul Nicholson is part of a team searching for traits in ancient wheat that can be used to fight disease.
We have information on its genetic diversity from the sequencing, and now we can look at phenotypic diversity and traits of interest. So some people will be doing yield, some people will be doing height or flowering time so that it works in a particular environment. For us, I'm a pathologist, I look at the diseases. And so for us, our first point of contact was wheat blast.
Wheat blast.
Yes, blast. A disease which didn't exist in the world until about 1985.
Oh, really?
It was a product of man-made movement of grasses from Africa into Brazil, carrying a fungus which mated with an endemic fungus within Brazil to create something totally new. And this new thing, unfortunately, can now attack wheat. And it destroys the entire crop in certain instances.
The disease can shrivel and deform the grain in less than a week, leaving farmers barely any time to act. It's already spread about 15,000 kilometres in 10 years. The fungus that causes it also affects rice, destroying enough rice a year to feed 60 million people. But amazingly, scientists have found resistance to it in the Watkins collection.
We observed at very low levels a very, very potent resistance to blast, which we'd not seen in wheat varieties from the modern day breeders. So we got very excited by that.
So let me see if I've got this right. You found resistance in one of the old varieties to a disease that didn't exist yet.
Yeah. Our best guess is that wheat didn't used to get infected by the fungus from Africa or the fungus from Brazil because they carry genes that encode things called effectors. They're small proteins that are used by the fungi to allow them to attack a plant. But plants resist by detecting that. So they have a receptor which can pick that up and mount a defense, and so the fungus can't infect. But when these two grasses mated, they got rid of essential effectors, so that wheat was sitting here now blind to infection, and now it's susceptible. But in those old land races from Watkins, there were just a few lines that carried a new resistance, or a different resistance, that allowed them to detect this new form of disease.
Professor Nicholson and his team also inoculate the wheat with other diseases to see if they can find other kinds of genetic resistance. You're also working on something a bit more pernicious than wheat blast, aren't you?
Yes, Fusarium head blight.
Fusarium head blight.
Fusarium head blight, exactly. It's caused by a fungus called Fusarium. The species is Fusarium graminearum. Again, like wheat blast, it affects the wheat spikes. Unlike wheat blast, which is benign in that it just destroys the grain, Fusarium head blight contaminates the grain with a toxin. This toxin is called deoxynivalenol, or DON, and in the US, it's termed vomitoxin, which gives you a rough idea of one of the side effects. The other is major elimination of immune function. So it can be quite potent if you're using this inadvertently, taking it in at a chronic level. Your immune system will be suppressed, so you may be more susceptible to other diseases. So it's important to eliminate this from the food chain. And across Europe, and certainly globally now, there are limits on what is permittable by way of DON in grain.
But that's an old fungus, not a new one.
Yeah, absolutely. This one has been around for millennia. We don't really understand the fungus, so we don't understand the resistance that is required to combat it. But one of the aspects, again, going back to the Watkins, is that when we look at wheat, we tend to look at it as a plant that is wheat. I sound a bit naive, but what we look at as wheat is probably not wheat. It's got a bit of wild grass in it, because over thousands and thousands of years, there have been these occasional crosses and bits of wild grass have crossed in, and we believe that a very, very old occurrence of an introduction from a variety or line called Triticum timofevi has introduced a resistance which we can now follow genetically by using the DNA markers into the Watkins, and then a subset of that into modern wheats.
This may be a stupid question, but how far are we away from having a kit where you can say to farmers or a whole country, you need to introduce this and you'll get rid of such and such?
We're working with an organisation called CIMIT, who are working in Mexico, and they're developing lines for global distribution for the major growing environments. And we've been providing markers for PM4 to them, and they've been coming back saying, well, we don't have it in our breeding program. So we can then say, but you do have, because you've obtained them from the GRU here, you've got the Watkins collection.
Some of the letters exchanged between Watkins and his collaborators across the planet still exist today. They come from a time of a world in flux, where people are determined to carry on while trying to survive in times of hardship. In some ways, not so very different from today.
This is Portugal.
Portugal.
Yeah.
Goodness, that's so
man.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Look at it, every location mapped. He must have gone, oh, that's marvellous.
Well, maybe this was a normal at the time, I don't know.
Yeah,
but as you
maybe.
say, fantastic effort.
That's absolutely gorgeous. And look at the paper, so
Yeah.
old, for want of a great word. What we've got here seems almost as precious as the land races you've shown.
Yeah, I can't go that far. I'd take the land races over the correspondence. But what this correspondence does give us is provenance.
Yeah.
And it really shows you that the material was collected prior to the onset of modern breeding. And these wonderful letters, you know, they're just, they really give you insight into what
Give us
it means to be a
a
land
bit
race.
from one of them.
Well, you can hear this is a letter from the Department of Overseas Trade in Portugal. And they're responding to Watkins, and he says, with reference to previous correspondence regarding samples of wheat grown in various countries, I have pleasure in forwarding under separate cover 100 samples of wheat which have been obtained by His Majesty's Consul at Lisbon.
Oh.
And that's really typical of how they were working.
So they went and they got them 100 samples. They didn't mess about.
Oh, no. Yeah. And the Watkins collection originally was much larger than it is today.
Right.
It was lost mainly due to the Second World War,
Oh.
but now we have 827 left from what they collected.
Second World War because people weren't here to look after it.
You've got to at this time, without refrigeration and without dehumidification, you had to multiply the material every 3 years.
Oh, right.
Second World War was 5 years, and I'm afraid that was just, and of course, resources went elsewhere, and the collection did suffer due to moth damage and reduced viability.
We've got some from China here. There's a nice one here. Large samples of these grains could always be obtained, but as the Chinese call them all maitsu, wheat, I send an ear of each kind so as to provide a means of identifying them. It's not only Watkins that's really dedicated. The people who are responding to him are really getting into the flow of it.
People took great care, and I think it's a very innovative way of plant collecting. If you think of I think a stereotype of a plant collector is wearing a pith helmet and going off into the country to collect it. This was a really efficient way of using a mechanism that was designed for other things to do really efficient biology. I'll give you this example. So this is material from Belgrade, wheat, so-called Potiska, 1927, grown by peasants in the country on both sides of the River Tisa.
So
that's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the language of its time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here's some from India.
Yeah.
Following wheats Pusa 4612, which I hope will reach you safely and in good condition. Imperial Economic Botanist. FIF Shaw, I think it says.
Yeah.
That's just marvellous. Here's a small letter. I could imagine just sitting for a couple of days and just reading every one of these. It would be astounding.
Yeah. Well, we have digitised them now, and we hope to make them public.
But until I saw these letters, I didn't understand what a worldwide effort it was, really, and the enthusiasm of the people.
Imagine if you wrote this as a project now.
Yeah.
It would be incredibly expensive.
Yes.
Because you just wouldn't be there. You'd have to employ everyone.
Yeah.
And then the incredible thing for us is that it was maintained. So within these UK institutions and institutes, it's been maintained over the years. The seed's been multiplied. And then in more recent years, we've developed these new resources from BBSRC funding, which has allowed us to do genetics on this material. I think it's wonderful.
So as the technology increases and the understanding increases, the more useful becomes this incredible collection.
Yeah, so what Watkins did 100 years ago, I would say we only had the technology to really use it in the past decade.
The stories we cover on Razor are about using science to create a better tomorrow. But, as with this story, we often find that the answers lie in our yesterdays.